Hi, I'm your host, Scott Cosens, in for C5 pilot Sarah Cowgill, along with Andrew Moran, John Clark, Dave Patterson, and Graham Noble. And this is The Conservative 5, an online video production of Liberty Nation News. Presidents get far too much credit and blame for economic conditions. However, they are perhaps the single person with the most effect on overall economic affairs. And what of Trump? This comparatively judged aggressive tariff imposition and enforcement was predicted to lead the U.S. and world into a recession. And we haven't seen it. Instead, it looks like a significant economic expansion is underway, nearing 4% growth. The President of the United States has near total control over these tariffs. Donald Trump has used a carrot and stick approach to bend our trading partner nations to his will on these issues. Andrew, you say the doom and gloomers got it wrong. Tell us why, and from one free marketeer to another, riddle me this. How much more would U.S. citizens have benefited from him dialing all those tariffs way down to zero and letting freedom ring for real in all these economic matters?
Okay, I'm going to answer your first question. So, despite you had that initial 0.5% contraction in the first quarter, and that was fueled by that historic acceleration in imports, and you had a modest drop in government spending. But in the second quarter, you had the 3.8% rebound. And then the current Atlanta Fed GDP Now model estimate, that's a running estimate of GDP that factors in all the various things that the Bureau of Economic Analysis relies on. It's just another 3.8% expansion for the third quarter. Now, before we go, we're all going to go into the GDP bro. Come on, bro, more GDP, bro. We have to look at other metrics to suggest that the economy is doing well. One thing that the White House is focusing on is capital expenditures, or CapEx. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, he calls it a CapEx comeback. This is long-term investment in things like equipment, business equipment, computers, machinery, all these things.
Is that different from durable goods?
It's in that same umbrella.
Okay.
And that thing has rocketed in the first half of 2025, and early estimates suggest another significant increase in the second half, and the White House attributes it to the One Big Beautiful Bill with the depreciation and the tax cuts. And then another factor the White House is also looking at is...
Hold on, put a pin in that extra factor. I just want to dial in on that,
Please.
That durable goods thing, because if not everybody knows about it, and I'm no economist, but I think I understand the significance of this, which is it's a very positive sign for long-term health of the economy, because it means that companies, instead of taking their cash and running to Sri Lanka with it, are instead investing in future production for their own benefit. They see a future in their own selves and they're investing in it. Is that a fair statement?
That is correct. But I would also caution that a lot of the CapEx boom you're experiencing is concentrated in artificial intelligence and the build out of, AI data centers, AI robotics, all those various factors. And now to the second part that the White House focusing on is real wage growth for blue-collar workers. On the first half of 2025, you had the largest increase of any president since Richard Nixon, 60 years ago. And that's up about almost 2% on a year-over-year basis. So now, to your second question, what would be... She didn't have any...
By the way, let me just add this. I'm surprised we haven't seen the headlines from the mainstream media. Trump liked Nixon, and then, story below, right? And then we could read that. It's a good thing later on. But anyway, go ahead.
Trump's like Nixon, who resigned.
Right. It's scandal.
So to your second question, for the audience, I don't get any hate mail or unflattering comments. I'll just say I'm not going to deliver a full verdict on the Trumponomics brand when it comes to tariffs until April 2026. Now, because of the lag effect that trade policy has and tariffs have on the economy and inflation. But I will say this. On the inflation front, the annual headline inflation would be much closer to 2% than it is to the 3% mark you have now. And when it comes to interest rates, the Fed has said that it would have already cut interest rates months ago if it were not for the uncertainty revolving around Trump's tariffs. So that's my view.
You said a lot there very quickly. I want to kind of slow that down. It sounds like what I just heard you say is that inflation will be greater than it would have otherwise been because of the Trump tariffs. And that's your prediction for what you're going to declare in, or what will be revealed in April. The inflation numbers looking backwards. And also you think that perhaps current interest rates would be lower. Lending rates, basically, people getting mortgages, they'd be able to borrow cheaper if the tariffs weren't as high because of instability. Yes?
Well, partially because the Fed isn't lowering interest rates
I know
because
partially, but that is what you were saying, right? Because I want to make sure that, okay,
yes,
it is because what we often hear, things that are sort of tribal attacks on Donald Trump. And we know that that's not what this is. This is an economic analysis that comes from the right discussing how the imposition against the free market may hurt people. And this is a thing that, as a libertarian in a world dominated by conservatives, that I often swim with. Sometimes I swim against them on these issues, and I just wanted to kind of tease that out for that reason. So,
if you may just make one quick point, if you comb through the consumer price index and you look at various tariff sensitive items, let's say apparel or new vehicles or canned fruits and vegetables, which is 90% imported from places like South Korea or China, those things have gone up. So it isn't a theory that, because Trump always says inflation has come down, there's no tarifflation. But you look at those numbers, they have gradually increased zero. Now, they haven't been meteoric like many expected, but that's because of the gradual implementation of the tariffs. But those tariff-sensitive consumer prices have gradually gone up. Now, a lot of companies, they've absorbed the tariffs. They've eaten a lot of the tariffs. Exporters have somewhat eaten the tariffs. But overall, the bill is going to eventually come home to pay, and that's going to be the form of higher prices. Now, dramatic
companies, and of course, companies that are quote unquote absorbing the tariffs it's not like they have extra sponges somewhere that other people don't have. They're not absorbing anything. They're taking the hit, which of course means downstream negative consequences for all the other things that matter when you're a business and you're not having the revenue that, you had previously. But let's turn our attention to John Clark, who has maybe grown vegetables for sale. I know he's ranched beef for sale. He is a farmer rancher as well as an attorney and political activist, and tired just naming all those jobs, much less doing them. But we'll ask you, John, how are Trump's policies influencing the markets that you follow? Obviously, of course, beef being the most important one to me personally, and people can read more about your beef writing on the pages of libertynation.com, and I encourage them to do so.
Well, thanks for the plug for us farmers. I think it's a good time to be in beef, and you can buy stocks or you can buy livestock, and livestock's here to stay, at least for the interim future. Food prices are up, but more broadly to this, because there are many moving parts here, and you mentioned the conservative criticism of tariffs from Andrew, which, I think he gives a pretty sobering, journalistic, balanced viewpoint, and the piece he wrote about this is great. I refer readers to it. But at core, what he's really talking about also is that the naysayers said that this was going to destroy the economy. And there are other moving parts. One is capital investments. When businesses have predictability in the tax code and tax benefits to invest long-term in equipment, Section 179 and other benefits, I think, were extended, they're going to do so. That's like a green light to build. And there's, $7 trillion, Andrew, or more that has been pledged for new investments and to bring home. I mean, so these are knock-on effects of tariffs that are not immediately apparent in prices. But, we've got business sentiment, and another big driver of the economy when we're looking at psychology and politics is consumer sentiment. So those high grocery prices might hit, wallets and pocketbooks more quickly and impact voters as we come into next year. So there are a lot of different pressures here, and the media is constantly going on about how horrible tariffs are going to be without looking at the fundamentals, just because there's a partisan drive to discredit anything Trump, actually then feeds back into consumer sentiment and can actually become self-fulfilling, in my view. So I'm relieved that we haven't seen more inflation. We are seeing capital repatriation into this country. We get 90% of our antibiotics from China, for our military included. That's not a good thing from a national security perspective. If tariffs push more domestic production, which it is, Eli Lilly and a number of other countries are going to be constructing factories here, creating jobs here. And something Andrew wrote about in his article is still some uncertainties around the labor market. Well, that's what affects those blue-collar people. You can bring wages up, but if there aren't enough jobs. So in that broader picture, I think that there are a lot of positives here. And the very fact that we haven't seen runaway inflation as predicted is itself, I think, hopeful that we can see some of these other more favorable dimensions of this policy work through. When you get into tariffs and the economy and farmers and soy and China, you're in one small part of the bigger picture, and that has another whole dimension as far as U.S. agricultural production.
A tariff is a tax increase, and just like any other tax increase, it's a bad idea anytime it's ever been tried, and it's an imposition on the people that we can do without.
And I agree, but you know what I find...
And having vaccine production in any country in the world has nothing to do with our tariff policy, except to the extent that tariff policy influences anything and everything. Certainly it does. But I just wanted to make the point that we cannot say that we can't have domestic vaccine production and also a zero tariff on imports. We can't have both of those things.
I agree, but I didn't mention vaccine. I'm talking about Tylenol and antibiotics that are fundamental to our health.
Sure. Oh, you said antibiotics, not. And by the way,
but also
the same thing can be true for antibiotics.
But also, well, so economic policy drives a lot of these decisions, but also those who want to tax corporations, this is indirectly taxing corporations, and they're chanting against tariffs all the time. But as Andrew pointed out, the corporations are absorbing a lot of those costs, which is then indirectly a tax on a corporation. But the receipts are going back into our coffers to pay down our debt. That influences interest rates. That influences how much we pay to service our debt. So again, there are many moving parts, and I'm not pitching for tariffs. I'm just relieved they have not had the dramatic harms that many.
It reads like a sales pitch to me, John Clark. That's just my feedback for you. But let's go to Graham Noble and see what he has to say about it.
Well, yeah, I'm in the same camp as the libertarians, and that is that in an ideal world there are no tariffs at all. Although, of course, I nevertheless do believe that if there are countries out there who absolutely refuse to give up their protectionist practices and are going to tariff U.S. goods coming into their countries, I do believe that we should at least impose reciprocal tariffs upon them. I mean, I don't want to see the U.S. Have zero tariffs and yet everyone else is tariffing us. So I do believe in the whole reciprocity thing, but in an ideal world, there would be no tariffs at all. And I still think... I'm no economist, but I'm going to say that the tariffs are going to have a more negative effect, in the coming months or so. I think we're going to see that. I think, the greatest blessing for Donald Trump, the best thing that his detractors did for him was to absolutely insist that he was going to take a wrecking ball to the U.S. economy, that he was going to basically that he was going to cause complete disaster, collapse, and we were going to be living in a kind of like, one of these movie style post-apocalyptic situations. And of course, they made it out to be so bad that when it didn't turn out to be that bad, everyone's like, well, actually, this is pretty good. Even though, yes, the prices are creeping up. Things aren't all, the economy right now isn't all lollipops and rainbows, but it seems to be compared with the utter disaster we were told it was going to be. So, Trump's probably chuckling to himself over that, I would imagine. I think the economy in the short term is not going to do. I don't think it's going to collapse. I don't think it's going to be terrible, but I think things are going to get worse, generally speaking, before they get better, perhaps.
And last but not least, Mr. Patterson.
Hey, from a national security perspective, we like tariffs because
I thought you might think that
they're a tool for getting an outcome that you really want in national security and geopolitical realms. Also, I might add that the last quarter for all of the aerospace and defense companies were up between 2% and 4%. So not so bad for selling arms overseas and selling arms domestically. And
you're singing my song. All the more reason, I think, to get dialing back down to zero. One of the things that I think is kind of curious is, tariffs are one of the few places where the president has near exclusive authority. And by frustrating his will with so many other of his initiatives, I think they kind of encouraged and forced him, if you will, to enjoy playing in this lane where he has few competitors. Thanks so much, panel. That's it for our Conservative 5 panel today. Check out our other C5 shows and segments on your favorite video platform. YouTube, Vimeo, Rumble. We're on them all. Liberty Nation News has its own Roku channel as well, where you can see all of our videos. Liberty Nation does not endorse candidates, campaigns, or legislation, and this presentation is no endorsement. I've been your host, Scott Cosenza, in for Sarah Cowgill. Thank you for joining us here, and for the latest news and commentary, your choice for free thinking, free speech, libertynation.com.